Some images pass quickly and vanish in memory, but there are moments that cut deep, like a knife against the heart, and shift the rhythm of a life forever. That morning, I saw such a moment, and from that instant on, my life would never be the same. My name is Margaret Hayes. I am 64 years old, living alone in an old apartment in Charlotte, North Carolina. Since the day my husband passed, I've kept the habit of walking each morning, as if my footsteps might still brush against his. I thought it would be an ordinary dawn. Damp air, the yellow glow of street lamps fading, the slow rumble of a garbage truck at the end of the block. But then, hidden in the sour scent of refuse, I heard something faint. A scratch. Timid. Desperate. I turned. At the corner of the public dump, among plastic bags ripped open by strays, a small body shivered. A Doberman pup, barely a month old. His black and tan coat was ragged, crawling with ticks. His ribs cut sharp lines beneath the skin. He clawed at a trash bag, trying to find food. But what froze me cold was this. His muzzle was bound tight with duct tape, the gray plastic biting so deep it had drawn blood. He clawed, he sniffed, but he could not open his mouth, could not eat, could not cry. The sight struck me like a blow to the chest. I stood rooted, breath caught in my throat. I had seen many things in life, from military funerals to the final breaths of my husband, but never had I seen a small living creature bound and abandoned with such cruelty. I stepped forward. He jerked back, his eyes widened, panic flashing, seeing me as nothing but another threat. His body quaked, his back pressed against the trash heap, his front paws digging into the wet ground. I understood. He no longer believed in human hands. To him, touch meant violence, betrayal. I lowered myself, keeping my distance. My voice softened, as though I were soothing a child lost in a nightmare. "Sweetheart, I won't hurt you. I only want to help." He didn't answer, only trembled harder, breath rasping through the tape that cut into his face. I saw blood seep, red against the dirty gray plastic. My heart clenched. I tried inching closer. He growled, a weak sound, more sigh than snarl. He pressed himself deeper into the pile of garbage, as if trying to vanish. I stopped. I couldn't rush this. If I forced him, it would break him beyond repair. I opened my backpack, pulled out a bottle of water, and an old cloth. I placed them on the ground, a few steps away, then sat still. I didn't reach, didn't call. I left them there as a promise. Here, there is safety. Time stretched. 5 minutes, 10, 20. I sat in the damp stench of waste, letting it cling to my coat, but I never looked away from that fragile soul. Inside me, a voice whispered, "Don't leave. He's already been left once. Don't let it happen again." His eyes shifted, the hard fear softening into hesitation. He glanced at the bottle, then at me. I stayed motionless, my heart pounding so hard I feared he could hear it. Then, slowly, painfully, he crept toward the cloth, still trembling, still wary. I dared not breathe too loudly. When he lowered his head to sniff, his legs shook so badly I thought he might collapse. That was when I saw the wounds around his muzzle, the dried streaks of blood, the raw flesh beneath, and I knew, if the tape was not removed, he would die. But how could I touch him when he still saw me as a stranger? I whispered, "You don't have to fight alone anymore. I'm here now, and I promise you, no matter how long it takes, I will not abandon you." He looked at me, and in those dark brown eyes, beneath the fear, flickered the faintest glimmer. I recognized it, a first spark, fragile but real. and I would hold on to it, even if it meant sitting there all day. Time thickened in that damp wasteland. I stayed seated on the cold cement, hands resting at my sides, eyes fixed on every trembling movement of the pup. He was exhausted. Each step seemed to drag the weight of his frail body, ribs cutting sharp beneath paper-thin skin. I felt it. One strong gust of wind could have toppled him for good. And yet, even in that state, he had not given up. His tiny claws, dirty and bloodied, still scratched faintly at the ground, as if to say, "I'm not ready to die." The sight choked me. I knew that if I walked away, no one else would ever come back to see him again. I whispered, "Sweetheart, I will not abandon you. Not ever again." He glanced at me, eyes flickering between fear and exhaustion. I inched the wool scarf a little closer, then drew my hand back, shrinking the space between us little by little. Once, twice, 3 times. Each time he recoiled, but the distance wasn't as wide as before. It wasn't until the sun began to rise over the rooftops, its first rays breaking through thin clouds, that he dared to step fully out from the heap of trash. His legs shook so violently that it seemed one misstep would bring him down. I held my breath. He shuffled forward a few steps, then stopped, eyes locked on me, bewildered. I lowered my hand to the ground, palm up, still and open like a bridge. I didn't call. I didn't push. I left the choice to him. And then, very slowly, he edged closer. He was less than an arm's length away now. I could see the wounds around his muzzle, the tape buried deep into swollen flesh, raw and purple. My stomach twisted at the sight. I spoke softly, my voice a vow. "I'll take this off for you. I promise." At that moment, he froze. In his dark brown eyes, I saw the faintest spark, a fragile acceptance. My hand trembled as I reached forward, terrified of hurting him. When my fingers brushed the dirty fur, he jerked, let out a weak growl, and then stayed. He only quivered, violently, but he did not turn away. I wrapped the scarf gently around him, slow and steady, then lifted him from the ground. His body was so light it startled me, like holding a bundle of brittle bones. But the faint breath was still there. He stirred weakly in my arms, eyes wary, but he didn't fight free. I pressed him against my chest, feeling the frantic rhythm of his heart thudding against mine. Tears welled as I whispered, "Don't be afraid, baby girl. From now on, I'll be the wall you can lean on." I hurried to my old car parked along the curb. Placing him on the passenger seat, I cranked the heater to its highest setting and wrapped the scarf tight around him. He curled in on himself, shivering like the last leaf of autumn, but his eyes no longer darted in panic. Perhaps in that moment, he sensed warmth again. Sliding into the driver's seat, I fumbled with the key, my hands trembling. The dashboard lights flickered, the tired engine groaned, but at last it turned over. I drew a deep breath, forcing my grip steady on the wheel. Each time I glanced over, seeing his body taut with pain, breath ragged, my chest clenched harder. The question rang inside me. Was it already too late? But I gripped the wheel tighter, answering myself aloud. No, as long as she's still breathing, still trembling in my arms, it is never too late. The road to Brooks Veterinary Clinic wasn't far, yet that morning it stretched like a lifetime. Each red light felt like a trial, each turn a mountain to climb. But I did not waver. My heart carried only one thought. I would get her to a place where she could be saved. At last, the old wooden sign came into view. Brooks Vet Clinic. Relief broke over me like victory after battle. I turned to her one more time. Her eyes were half closed, her small frame still shaking inside the scarf. I laid my hand gently over her chest and whispered, "We're here, Grace. You may be weak, but you will never be forsaken again." The glass door swung open with the soft chime of a bell. The cold sting of antiseptic filled my face. I carried Grace, wrapped in a rain-soaked wool scarf, and hurried inside. Fluorescent lights burned harshly above us, pouring down on the trembling body in my arms. At the counter, a woman with silver-streaked hair looked up. Dr. Eleanor Brooks, my college friend, though we hadn't seen each other in more than 40 years. She looked at me, then at the fragile life in my arms. Her glasses slid down the bridge of her nose. "Oh my God, Margaret," her voice caught. "What happened to her?" I laid Grace on the cold steel table. She was so light that the surface didn't dip at all. The scarf fell back, exposing a body of skin and bone, her muzzle bound with duct tape pressed deep and bruised. Ticks crawled along her neck and ears. Her hind leg was swollen, a dark purple lump bulging as though ready to burst. "Left in the dump," I whispered, eyes never leaving her. Her mouth sealed shut. She couldn't eat. She searched through the garbage until she collapsed. Eleanor pulled on gloves and pressed the stethoscope to the tiny chest. A weak, broken rhythm. Her brow furrowed. Hypothermia. Severe infection. Systemic collapse. And this mass here. She touched the hind leg gently. "It could be a granuloma. It could be malignant. We'll need a biopsy. But first..." She lifted her eyes, sorrow behind the lenses. "Margaret, her chances are very slim." I froze. A hollow cold spread inside me. Since losing my husband, I thought nothing could frighten me anymore. But at that word, slim, my hands began to shake uncontrollably. "Eleanor," my voice faltered. "Give me the number. Tell me." She sighed. "Less than 10%. A body this weak may not survive the surgery at all. If it were anyone else, I would say, let her go. For the cost, for the risk, for the pain. But you've never been like everyone else." I looked down at Grace. She didn't cry, didn't struggle. She only lay there, eyes half shut, breath shallow, but still there, still holding on. I remembered her clawing at the trash, desperate yet unwilling to give up. And I knew, if I turned my back now, she would never have another chance. I drew a breath, each word heavy as stone. "Then that 10% belongs to her. Do it. Save her, whatever it takes." Eleanor said nothing, only nodded. "All right. We'll begin right away." 2 nurses entered. They placed an IV line, readied the instruments, and the surgical lamps flashed on. I was ushered out. The steel door shut behind me, leaving me alone in the hallway. The only sound was the monitor inside, each beep echoing down the corridor. I pressed my back to the wall, my forehead against the chill. Memories rushed back. The last night in the hospital, holding my husband's hand, hearing his heartbeat slow until it was gone. Then, I was helpless. But today, I refused to be. I closed my eyes, whispered like a prayer. "Please don't take her. She's suffered enough. If you must take something, take her pain, but leave this breath." Inside, metal instruments clinked. Eleanor's steady voice called, "Remove the tape. Carefully. Watch the necrotic tissue." A nurse, "Her heart's dropping. More oxygen. Hurry!" I stopped breathing. The monitor stuttered, then went silent for one long beat. My own heart seemed to stop with it. Then, beep. Another. Faint, but steady. A nurse cried softly, "She's back." Tears spilled down my cheeks. My hands clutched at my chest. Minutes later, the door opened. Eleanor stepped out, sweat across her brow, gloves stained with blood. She pulled off her glasses, voice hoarse. "We've removed the tape and addressed the mass for now. She's still with us. But Margaret, this is only the beginning. The road ahead is long." I wiped my tears, nodding. "As long as she's breathing, I'll be here. I will not leave her." Eleanor placed her hand on my shoulder. For a long moment, she only looked at me, then whispered, "Margaret, I believe you. And maybe she does too." I turned to the small glass window. Grace lay on the recovery table, body wrapped in bandages, IV line in her leg. Her heart still beat, weak, but there. I pressed my palm against the cold glass, whispering for her alone. "You've made it through the first battle. From now on, we fight together." The white light from the recovery lamp poured down on the small, bandaged body. Grace lay on her side, motionless, an IV line in her leg, the monitor beeping slow and steady, like a faint knock from another world. I stood outside the glass, both hands pressed to my chest, listening to every beep as though it were my own breath. "The surgery was only the beginning of the story," Eleanor said quietly, stepping beside me. "Margaret, now the real battle begins. She's so weak. Her body has almost no energy left. The next few hours will decide everything." I nodded, but I couldn't take my eyes off Grace. I remembered that moment at the dump, when she clawed at a plastic bag for scraps, when her eyes shook as they looked at me like I was the enemy. And now, here she was again, helpless, her fate in human hands once more. This time, I could not fail her. That night, I sat on a hard plastic chair outside the recovery kennel. Nurses moved around, shoes tapping across the floor, the sharp scent of disinfectant heavy in the air. I laid my husband's old prayer book across my lap, opening to the page he used to read on sleepless nights. My voice was hoarse, but I read, not for myself, but for Grace. I wanted her to hear, even in her fevered sleep. "Sweetheart, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." She didn't stir. Quietly, I placed my hand on the steel bars, as if it could be a bridge between two worlds. The monitor kept on, slow but steady. The next morning, Eleanor entered with a small tray. "We have to try giving her a little liquid," she said. I looked at her, then nodded. I asked to do it myself. Taking a plastic spoon, I dipped it into the chicken broth Eleanor had prepared. The warm scent rose, carrying me back to the kitchen of long ago, when my husband was still alive. I lifted the spoon to Grace's muzzle. She didn't open her eyes, didn't move. I whispered, "You don't have to do much. Just a little, so I know you still want to stay." 1 minute passed, then 2. My hand shook from holding the spoon too long. I began to lower it, when her nose twitched. A long, faint breath, then the small pink tongue reached out and touched the broth. Just once. But it was enough to break me open. Tears streamed down my cheeks, dripping onto the scarf in my lap. Eleanor stood at the doorway, her own eyes red. "Margaret," she whispered, "you just did something medicine can't. You gave her the choice to live." In that moment, I knew the fight wasn't over. But I had an ally now, Grace herself. The days that followed found a quiet rhythm. In the mornings, I arrived before the clinic opened. At night, I left only after the last nurse went home. I sat beside her, reading old pages aloud, telling her stories of my late husband, of the little house once full of laughter, of Charlie, the old dog who had slept at my feet through 14 winters. I didn't know how much she heard. But each day, her eyes stayed open longer. Her breath grew steadier. One afternoon, as I brought the spoon of thin porridge close, She lifted her head, slowly, weakly, and licked. Not once, but twice, then 3 times. I broke down in sobs. I stood up, raising both arms like a child who had just scored the greatest goal of her life. A young nurse smiled. "Mrs. Hayes, she's learning to trust again." I turned, voice ragged. "No, she's teaching me how to live again." That night as I left, I stopped at the small window. Grace curled beneath a blanket, eyes half closed, her breathing even. The monitor still beeped slowly, but now it sounded like a song, like a melody of life pulled back from the hand of fate. I pressed my palm to the glass, whispering to her, though I knew she couldn't hear. "You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever, a reason to wake up tomorrow." After the first time Grace licked the spoon of broth, the entire clinic seemed to brighten with a spark of hope. Eleanor told me, "Margaret, this is just the beginning. She needs time, nourishment, and above all, patience. I believe you can give her that." And I did. Every morning I arrived before daylight touched the windows. I carried a dry wool scarf to replace the soaked one from that night at the dump. I spread it over my lap and lifted Grace from the recovery kennel, resting her gently in my arms. She was still fragile, but in her eyes I saw something different. No longer only fear, but a flicker of curiosity, a quiet question. Can I trust this time? Day by day I fed her spoonfuls of thin porridge, drops of warm milk. Each lick eased a weight inside me. I read aloud from old books, hummed my husband's songs, told her stories of my years as a teacher, of the flowers I once grew on the back porch. I knew she didn't understand the words, but I believed she could hear the rhythm of my heart, my breath, that she understood this time. She was not alone. One morning, as I set the small bowl of porridge near her paws, I felt something brush my ankle. I looked down. Her tiny, skinny tail was wagging, trembling, slow, as though she herself was surprised by the movement. I froze, tears spilling over. I whispered, "Grace, you just told me you want to live, and you trust me." It was the first true sign of faith. And from that day forward, everything changed. In the weeks that followed, Grace began lifting her head for longer stretches, her eyes wide, watching the world. Her fur softened under the nurses' hands as they bathed her, the stench of sickness giving way to the gentle scent of soap. The wounds around her muzzle healed, leaving red scars along the corners of her mouth, marks of a memory that would never fade. I still sat by her side each night, but it was no longer the silence of despair. I spoke more, laughed sometimes at old memories, and when I laughed, I noticed her ears twitch. One afternoon, while I was cutting boiled chicken into small pieces, I felt something against my leg. I looked down. Grace stood there, eyes bright, tail wagging fully this time. I laughed and cried all at once, dropping the chicken piece to her. She ate slowly, as if relearning what it meant to be allowed to exist. But as joy grew, so did reality. I lived in a small third-floor apartment in an old building. Pets were not allowed. For weeks, Grace had stayed at the clinic, and I hadn't faced it. But then Eleanor said, "Margaret, she's strong enough to leave now, but she needs a home, a safe place." My throat tightened. I thought of the cramped rooms, the long stairs, and the suspicious eyes of neighbors. I remembered the warnings from management when I had once fed strays outside. If I brought Grace there, I would have to hide her, keep her secret. And after everything she had survived, I could not bear the thought of her living as a mistake to be concealed. That evening, I drove us back to the apartment. Grace curled on the passenger seat, head resting on my late husband's pillow. She didn't sleep, only stared out the window, eyes distant, flinching now and then at the sound of passing horns. I looked at her, then at the long flights of stairs leading to my dim little home. In my chest, a question rose. Could this truly be the place where she heals? When I set her down on the living room floor, she didn't explore, didn't wander. She slipped beneath the table, pressing herself against the wall, back turned to me. I sat on the sofa in silence. The fan rattled overhead, the lamp cast a sickly yellow, and the room pressed heavy with stillness. I felt like a betrayer of my own promise. I had vowed she would never be abandoned again, and yet here I was, forcing her to live hidden in shadows. That night, as I drifted off on the sofa, I heard her breathing hard beneath the table. She was dreaming, paws twitching, a faint whimper in her throat. I didn't call, didn't reach. I simply lowered my hand to the floor, palm up, still. After a long while, a nose brushed against me. A quick lick, then her head rested on my wrist, trembling but staying. I closed my eyes, tears slipping into the pillow. In that moment, I knew. I couldn't let Grace stay in this apartment much longer. She needed another place, a place with sky, with grass, with freedom. And I needed it too. The next morning, when sunlight slipped through the narrow window of my apartment, I saw Grace still huddled beneath the table. She wouldn't step out, wouldn't explore, as if the shadows were the only place she felt safe. I sat there a long time, watching her small body pressed into the corner, and inside me, a pain coiled tight. I knew then, if I kept her here, I would betray my own promise, that she would never again live as something discarded. That evening, I opened my laptop. My hands trembled as I typed into the search bar, "House for rent with yard, Charlotte." Dozens of listings appeared, most far beyond my reach. But at the bottom of the list, I saw it. A small, pale blue house, shingles faded, a backyard with grass grown too high. It wasn't perfect, but to me, it looked like a possibility. 3 days later, I signed the lease. And on a drizzly afternoon, Grace and I moved in. The house was plain, with weathered boards peeling, a crooked fence leaning with age. But the yard stretched wide, green with overgrown grass, and at the back stood a great oak casting its shade. I set Grace down in the middle of the yard. She stood frozen, ears drooping, eyes darting, tail tucked tight. Everything was too new. I sat on the steps, waiting in silence. A breeze stirred the grass. Grace lifted her head, glancing at me as though asking permission. I nodded, my voice soft. "Go on, sweetheart. From now on, this land is yours. No one will ever bind you again." She hesitated. Then suddenly, her legs carried her forward. At first clumsy, unsteady, but with each stride quicker, bolder. She ran circles in the yard, ears high, tail wagging, every step like a drumbeat of freedom. For the first time, I saw Grace no longer as the trembling ghost from the dump. She was alive, truly alive, tasting a freedom she had never known. Tears burned down my cheeks. I clutched my chest, watching her run wide loops, running until she panted, yet unwilling to stop. This time she didn't look back to see if I was there. She just ran, as if she finally believed she was allowed to live. When she stopped in the center of the yard, tongue out, eyes blazing bright, I saw something in her gaze I cannot put into words. No longer the trembling stare of the garbage heap. No longer fear of human hands. It was the look of a small warrior who had reclaimed her own life. That night, in the new house, I laid the wool blanket in the corner of the living room. But Grace didn't crawl beneath the table. She padded slowly toward the sofa, then leapt up, curling beside me. Her head rested on my thigh, her eyes half closed. I held my breath as tears slipped down my face, my hand resting on her back. "Grace," I whispered, "you don't need to hide in the dark anymore. This is our home. This is where I promise to keep you safe." That night, I didn't sleep, but not from worry. I sat listening to her steady breathing at my side, and inside me grew a warmth I hadn't felt in years. The next morning, as I poured my coffee, I looked out through the glass door. Grace was already in the yard, head lifted to the breeze, tail gently wagging. And in that moment, I understood. Perhaps I hadn't just saved her. Perhaps she was saving me too, pulling me out of the dim apartment, out of the hollow years, and giving me a reason to begin again. The following spring arrived gently, like a gift after the long winter. Each morning, I stepped out onto the porch with a hot cup of coffee in hand, and Grace bounded across the yard like a child discovering the world for the very first time. She was no longer the trembling pup I had lifted from the garbage heap. Her body was strong now, her black and tan coat gleaming in the sun, her eyes shining bright. The scars around her muzzle remained, but they were no longer marks of pain. They had become silent medals of survival. Every morning, before rushing into the yard, Grace leapt onto my bed, pressed her muzzle against my chest, and stayed perfectly still for 5 minutes. No barking, no sound, just stillness, as if to say, "We still have each other today." I rested my hand on her head, answering softly, "Yes, sweetheart, we still have each other." Some nights, I woke in the dark to feel a familiar weight at my feet. Grace stretched across, breathing evenly, one paw draped over my ankle. Just that small touch, and warmth filled me. For years I had believed my life ended the day my husband died. I had lived like a shadow, moving through the days only waiting for my own ending. But now, because of this once abandoned soul, I was learning again how to feel life, every small moment, every heartbeat. One May afternoon, while trimming roses in the backyard, Grace began digging near the old shed. I thought she was just playing until she carried something out in her mouth. My heart tightened. It was a filthy strip of plastic, the same kind that had once bound her muzzle in the dump. She dropped it at my feet and sat down, eyes locked on me. No bark, no wag, just a gaze, deep, still, reminding me of where she had come from. I bent, picked up the bag, my eyes burning. I sat on the porch steps, Grace at my side. We stayed quiet for a long time, staring at that dirty scrap. Then I rose, went inside, and returned with a lighter. Holding the plastic up to the wind, I whispered, "Grace, this will never define you again." The flame caught, eating through the plastic until it was gone. Ash drifted into the air, carried away. Grace set one paw on my knee, her eyes blazing as if she understood. I stroked her head, voice breaking. "You were always worth saving, and I thank God he let me find you." That night, I printed a photo of Grace the first day she ran free across the yard, ears high, tail flying, eyes sparkling with joy. I framed it and placed it by the front door. Beneath it, I wrote by hand, "Absolutely worth saving." The next morning, when I opened the door, Grace bolted into the yard, circling as always. But this time, she stopped in the middle, head lifted high, eyes fixed on me. There was nothing left of the frightened dog from the dump. What I saw was the gaze of a warrior, a being who had chosen life, and won. I sank down on the porch steps, tears spilling, but they were no longer tears of loss. They were the tears of someone who had rediscovered meaning. I whispered into the wind, They say I saved her, but the truth is, she saved me. Grace ran to me, pressing her muzzle into my hand, tail wagging furiously. I wrapped my arms around her, feeling that small heart beating wildly. And I knew, from this day forward, no part of my life would ever be empty again. Perhaps, watching Grace run free today, some would say I gave her a second chance. But the truth is, she was the gift that redeemed my life. When I thought I was too old, too hollow to begin again. And now, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever saved a dog's life? A small soul, cast aside, who seemed like no one could want it. Yet with one outstretched hand, a little patience, a little kindness, you changed its world. And perhaps your own? If you have, please share your story in the comments. Let us spread those moments together, the moments that prove no dog, no living soul deserves to be abandoned or left alone. Because sometimes the smallest act of compassion can be an entire world to another being. And just maybe, as Grace did for me, it will quietly rescue your own heart.